And welcome back to the program, Sports Talk. Doug Miles and Don Henderson coming to you here on a Monday night. Good to be back with you again. And today we're going to talk a little horse racing, kind of vintage horse racing, if you will, as we go back in time, back to 1979, and a brand new book out all about the Great Horse Spectacular Bid and his quest for the Triple Crown that year. A lot of interesting things happened in that year of horse racing, and our author guest today has written a book about it called The Fast Ride, Spectacular Bid, and the Undoing of a Sure Thing. And Jack Gilden joined us tonight. And Don, we were just talking before we went on the air about you did, of course, a horse racing show for many years up in Philadelphia, but this book really kind of gets into not only what happened on the track, but what happened behind the scenes, and it's a fascinating story. So, Don, I'll let you kind of start it.
Well, Jack, I congratulate you because not many people write much about the backside. And very, very interesting. And the fact that you're from Baltimore, obviously one of the three majors, and you had to be involved not only in baseball, but you had to be involved in racing if you lived in Baltimore.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I actually was not so involved with racing, but, you know, I was born practically right in the parking lot of Pimlico at Sinai Hospital and drove back and forth past it practically every day of my life, going from my own home to my grandmother's. And, you know, it's kind of in your blood around here, but I wasn't really particularly a racing guy when I started the book.
You learned a lot. I'll tell you, most people do not realize much about racing. They see the Sport of Kings from the stands. They see it from the refreshment center and the bar, but they don't see it from behind the scenes in the backstretch, and that's a whole different picture.
It sure is. And I mean, I think that was one of the pleasures of writing the book, is to kind of give the readers a glimpse into a world that they're probably not too familiar with. And I think in a case of a lot of really good nonfiction books, that's exactly what the writers do. They kind of show you something you haven't seen before. That's why people like those mafia books and things like that. So it was really fun as a writer to glimpse into that world.
Jack, I grew up about a mile away from Belmont in Floral Park, so I always kind of knew it was racing season, obviously, just that being that close to it. Of course, Triple Crown and Belmont Stakes Day, the traffic would just go past our house, so we always kind of had an interest in it from that aspect. And I remember very well 1979, of course, the Triple Crown years before that, in 77 and 78, and going back to the Secretariat. I kind of followed it since then, but 79 was kind of an unusual year in a sense. This Horse Spectacular Bid kind of came up, a sire of Secretariat, right? Wasn't he one of his offspring?
No, he was not one of his offspring.
He wasn't? Okay, maybe I got that wrong then. I thought he was an offspring.
They were kind of loosely related to each other. They were from the same family, but he was not. In fact, he raced against one of Secretariat's sons in the Triple Crown, a General Assembly.
Right.
But he himself was this, from bold, bitter blood.
Jack, what turned you on to the story to begin with? Because it is a very unusual story of winning after losing. So give us a little thumbnail sketch of what got you into it right from the beginning.
Well, I had an old friend who one day got up early in the morning and he heard me doing publicity for my book about Johnny Unitas and Don Shula. That came out in 2018. And so he heard it. We hadn't seen each other in decades, but we were good friends way back when. And he called me up and he said, do you remember Ronnie Franklin, the jockey? And I said, sure. And he said, he's about to die. He's at a hospice. And he said, I employed him as a horse trainer for a while. I know him really well. We're very good friends. And I was hoping maybe you'd consider writing something about him. So he kind of brought me into it. And, I wasn't very interested, but he brought me up. I interviewed him. I still wasn't too interested. And then, I finally started to get the idea that there was a very big story here.
Doug?
Yeah, two main characters, like you said, real life people, obviously, but the two main people in the book are jockey Ron Franklin and trainer Bud Delp. I kind of remember just watching the coverage that whole summer and spring and summer about that. And Bud Delp really, I guess all trainers are characters in a sense, but he seemed to kind of go beyond being a character. Not the most likable guy, at least, I remember just watching him on TV. He seemed kind of arrogant, and reading your book, I guess other people had that opinion too, right?
Well, a lot of people had that opinion of him, and there was a third main character in the story, and that was Bud's son,
Right.
Gerald Delp. He was Buddy's son, and he was Ronnie's best friend, and he became, a very important person to me as well as I wrote the book. He had the most inside glimpses of the things that happened. The book couldn't have been written without Gerald, but he was a little bit younger than Ronnie. They were both teenagers living with Buddy Delp, and as you know, and as we'll get into, Ronnie became an addict, a cocaine addict in that situation, and so did Gerald right alongside of him. And it was very sad. I mean, they were both probably in their mid-teens or even early teens when they first tried cocaine, and they became addicted before the age of 20.
Well, that's one of the things about the backstretch that they say people don't get to see. You'll read a little bit about the horses now being doctored, and one of the great trainers of all time is banned at Kentucky and can't be participating in the Kentucky Derby or any of the races for a couple of years. But drugs on the backstretch, and let me qualify that by saying you have a very young, very Latin American dominated backstretch, and drugs are a little bit more familiar to them from an early age up, and it's very, very prevalent all over the tracks in the back, and you have to really be careful about what you do at the racetrack and how you go about it, because they don't really think that it's a criminal offense.
Well, yeah, they don't think so, but it may not be in their minds a criminal offense, but it's a very dangerous game to play. And in the case of Franklin, he was a young, innocent guy, really. He came from a very, how would I put it, kind of like a sheltered environment. He was
right.
Kind of a street tough, but he was just really like the baby of a large family, and his mother really doted on him, and his father cared a great deal for him, and they really took care of him because he was so small, and he walked into a world of corruption there, and it destroyed him. I mean, he had his greatest days and his downfall all before he turned 20 years old.
I think people that get this book, and we hope they do, are going to be even more. Maybe shocked is the right word in this. I was a little surprised. I knew, a bit of a shady character that Delp was, but I didn't realize until I read your book. You mentioned, we're just talking about the drug situation, but the trainer of Delp himself was, imbibing in that as well, and didn't seem any problem that his, son and Jackie were doing it. At least he knew it was going on. So tough situation.
Well, there were a lot of things going on there. I mean, in addition to using drugs and getting the boys into the drugs. I mean, a lot of money was disappearing, and the animals were being doped, and
right.
Animals were also being shocked with like electrical cattle prods and things of that nature. I mean, there were just many, things going on that were really, I don't know, I guess horrifying to see. They're horrifying and sad.
Well, Jack, so many people have written in recent years about exactly what you're referring to, and not only the danger of racing itself, but the problems they have with the horses. I mean, they just it's a very, very difficult, very tenuous situation to keep these horses healthy, and yet at the same time take them to the outer limits of what they can do, and it's not that easy.
Well, people don't realize, I mean, on the one hand, they are so incredibly powerful, and yet they're surprisingly delicate instruments. I mean, they really are easily injured, and, they have a lot of problems.
They're very skittish, right? Aren't they real skittish animals? Yeah.
Sometimes they can be skittish, not all of them, but they can be skittish, and they can have a number of problems, and, the drugs have been a big part of the scene. I mean, in my research, I was able to find, like doping issues and so forth, like going all the way back to the 1930s, maybe before. So it's a long-standing problem. And, there was all kinds of doping issues with the animals and cruelty to them. And, but I have to say this, not everything is just black and white. There was a lot even redeemable about Buddy Delp, although I guess he's kind of the villain of the story. He was also a magnificent trainer. And in his own way, he loved his family, and, and even Ronnie Franklin, he did a lot of nice things for Ronnie Franklin, but he also had this horrendous side to him, which we showed. The same way, racing is kind of similar to that in the sense that a lot of horrible things happen in racing, but racing isn't inherently evil. There's a lot of great things about horse racing. It's a gorgeous sport, beautiful, and it's really thrilling. There's no aesthetic beauty like a horse race rather. There's nothing like it. But it's, people can take any kind of structure and either use it for great things or they can, corrupt it. And, racing has seen both sides of it.
Jack, tell a little bit for all the people that are listening right now across the country, a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of the horse itself, because the horse is really the story.
Yeah. Well, the horse was, people don't believe me when I say this. They think it's like hyperbole. But the horse was better than Secretariat. And you could, there are a number of ways that you could make that case. He was broke a lot of Secretariat speed records. He set a world record. And he went on a tear of, I think it was 12 straight stakes victories, which no horse had done since around the World War II era. He, I think I said already, set the world record. He was just a magnificent horse. After he had the stakes race streak snapped, later on in his 4-year-old year, he went on a nine stakes race winning streak.
Yeah.
And and in all that time, he was, what was it, the handicap races, as the older horses do, he was carrying weight and tremendous amounts of it. Very unusual for a horse that was headed for stud like he was. So he was an incredible horse. I think Willie Shoemaker, who rode him after Ronnie Franklin, he, what was his career, like 40 years or, it was some gigantic number of years that he rode. He was on many, many historic horses, and he said Spectacular Bid was the best horse he ever rode.
Yeah, part of the drama of the story, like you just mentioned, not only the drug situation, but Ron Franklin, the jockey, and just getting the mount was kind of controversial among the other jockeys. I know Jorge Velasquez, Angel Caderos, a couple other great jockeys of the time, and other jockeys were kind of saying, hey, who is this guy being put on this great horse, or at least developing as a great horse? And there was a lot of tough times for Ron Franklin to deal with that, right?
Well, there was a lot of classism and racism intertwined in that, and all of that. Ronnie, was not only young, but Stevie Coffin was, essentially the same age year before and won the Triple Crown on Affirmed. But Ronnie was a different story. He didn't come from racing stock. His father was a forklift driver at a really tough neighborhood of Baltimore called Dundalk, where the steel and other manufacturing plants were. And Ronnie came out of that environment. He never saw a horse in his life till he was about 15 and came to Pimlico to be a hot walker. And he was a high school dropout, and he had a number of things going against him. And there was just a lot of resentment aimed his way. So he, and they were always saying all along that he didn't have what it took to be a jockey on a horse like that. Well, it might have been true about that particular horse, but in general, he was actually, what I found was that he was a very fine young jockey.
Jack, let me ask you this, because you said at the top, I can't remember whether it was before we went on the air or afterward, that you were never really a horse aficionado. You were not one that wanted to sit back and watch the races from the time you were a young fella until you got into the book. How about now? Are you more inclined to go to Pimlico or go to the races, or you still sort of say, well, it was a great story, but it's not something that I would really be involved with?
No, I love it now. Now, but I have to qualify it by saying I'm not really into the gambling and all of that. But I love racing. I love the animals. I love the trainers. When I was working on this book, one of my friends is a really very fine author, John Eisenberg. He's also lives in Baltimore. And he said to me, he's written, I think, maybe two books about horse racing before I did. And he said the greatest stories in sports come from the track. And boy, he was so right about it. The characters, the situations. I mean, it's just unbelievable how incredibly rich the racing world is for storytelling.
Well, let's go back again to 1979 and just kind of recap quickly. Of course, the racing season, the spring season, Triple Crown with Spectacular Bit, of course, winning the Derby and the Preakness, and then going into the Belmont at, I guess, the lowest odds, if not ever, then one of the lowest odds, I think it was 1-9, right?
Yeah. I mean, it had incredibly low odds, and, if you bet on them, you would barely make a nickel
Make about
back.
20 cents on $2, right? If that.
Yeah, or less. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an incredibly good horse, and which was recognized at the time. But what was happening is that the kid was practically having a nervous breakdown right in front of the eyes of everybody, and nobody really seemed to notice it. I mean, he, in addition to the drug problems, he'd recently had a girl give birth to his child, and he had he was losing all his money faster than he was making it. It was being lost not only to the cocaine that he was paying for himself and the entire house, but he was also losing it in droves and poker pots and fake bets and things like this. There were all kinds of things going on with his money. He'd kind of been goaded into a rivalry with Angel Cordero. And Delp had kind of goaded him into it, and Cordero had definitely goaded him into it. And it became kind of ugly and racial. Franklin called Cordero a very ugly, epithet for a Spanish person. And all the rest of the Hispanic riders took umbrage, as they should have. And, so this little kid, basically, this 19-year-old boy, he ends up with this gigantic target on his back, in addition to all the other problems he had. And then he and Cordero, they're plowing horses into each other and fist fighting in the locker rooms. I mean, it was an awful lot for a 19-year-old to deal with.
Well, I think an awful lot of people are going to get a lot of joy out of reading the book, and I'll let Doug wind it up here. And I'll tell you, it's been a lot of fun chatting with you. I learned a little bit on the side at the same time, and best of luck with the book. I hope you can really run it right through the table.
Well, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to write it, and I really poured my guts into it. I mean, I did nothing else for 4 years but research and write it.
And again, we won't give it away, obviously, for people that may not have remembered it or weren't born yet, but you can watch the race on YouTube. I watched it recently after I read the book just to kind of remind myself. And again, we said the horse went off at 1-9 odds, and unexpected things happened. And there was something before that happened in the backstretch. The horse stepped on a pin. That's a whole great storyline you have right there. We won't get into it now, but all that and then the aftermath of that. So there's a lot of drama in this book. It's a great book.
Yeah, it's an extremely dramatic story with many twists and turns to it. If you like racing, but even if you don't, it's really a story that will grab your attention, I think.
Let me give the full title. Let me give the full title once again: "The Fast Ride, Spectacular Bid, and the Undoing of a Sure Thing," and published by the University of Nebraska Press. And Jack Gilden, do you have a website you want to direct people to, or just go any of the book sites have it?
They can feel free to look me up on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. If they want to write to me, they can feel free to do it. I'll get back to you if you write to me with any questions. And but no website, just social media.
And we'll put a link as well for people who want to get more information on the book. But Jack Gilden, pleasure talking to you. And Don, you want to finish it up?
Well, no, just the same thing. I thought it was very, very interesting and learned a little bit at the same time. It's obvious that you spent a lot of time, 4 years, putting this thing together, and there's been a couple of great books recently on horse racing, and I hope that yours is as successful as some of the others, because all of a sudden horse racing has sort of come back in favor again after a long term of being in the background.
It's a great sport, and it's but it's an interesting one. It's got its ups and downs, so I have to say, I really love meeting you two guys, and I appreciate you inviting me on your program.
Great. Thanks, Jack. We'll talk to you soon.